In this lesson, we are going to learn about scope. In JavaScript, scope refers to the context in which variables, function, and objects are accessible. There are mainly two types of scope, global scope and local scope. Global scope. Variables declared outside of any function have global scope, meaning they can be accessed from anywhere within the script. Local scope. Variables declared within a function have local scope, meaning they are accessible only within that function. And JavaScript also has lexical scoping, meaning inner function can access variables from other functions, but not vice versa. So let's have a look at the example. Let's write const global variable and write I am global. And in the function global, I can write console log global variable. Now let's call that global function. See, this function can access this. I am global because this is a global variable. Now, local scope. Local scope means that variables declared within a function have local scope. They're accessible within the function. So I'm going to write another variable and I'm going to call it let inside function, and it is going to be I am a variable accessible only inside the function. And if I call this console log this inside function, what does it say? Reference error inside function is not identified because it is not being identified. But if I call it here and call the global, I'm a variable accessible only inside the function. So here, this is finding this variable, but when I want to write here, it is showing me the reference error inside function is not defined because it does not know where it is. And there is another one, it's called lexical scoping. It means that the inner function can access variables from outer function, but not vice versa. So this inner function, let's just completely change to just completely write another thing function outer function, and is going to be called let outer var is going to be I am outside variable, and then function inner function, and then console log outer var, and I'm calling this inner function here, and then I'm calling the outer function here. See, it can access this variable outside function. Now, if I want to console log outer var, then it is showing me that outer var is not defined. So it means that JavaScript has lexical scoping. The inner function can access variables from outer function. The inner function can access variable from outer function, but outer function cannot access variables from the inner function. So this is it. To learn it more in depth, let's let let's declare a variable here and call it inner var, and it's going to be I am an inside variable, and let's console log it inner var. Let's see. So the inner var is not defined, but my inner function can access the outer var, but whatever inside the inner function cannot be accessed by the outer var. So inner function can access variables from outer functions, but not vice versa. Now let's learn about scope pollution. Scope pollution is when we have too many global variables that exist in the global namespace, or when we reuse variables across different scopes. Scope pollution makes it difficult to keep track of our different variables and sets us up for potential accident. For example, global scope variable can collide with other variables that are more locally scoped, causing unexpected behavior in our code. Let's have a look at that in with example. Let me comment this out, and then I'm going to write let num is equal to, let's just say, 70, and const a function my num is going to be uh, this is the arrow. So another num is going to be 100. And if I console log num, my num, calling it and console logging, let's see what my num gives me. It is giving me the num is 100, right? So is it is giving me this num 100. Okay. Then if I console log the num, but it is giving me also 100. So the this value has been changed to 100. This is what the scope pollution means. So given the challenges with global variable and scope pollution, we should follow best practices for scoping our variables as tightly as possible using block scope or the local scope. So there are some good practices that we can follow for better scoping. Minimize global variables, limit the use of global variables to prevent naming conflict and unintended modification. Use function scope, declare variables within the smallest possible scope to avoid pollution. Avoid variable hoisting, declare variables at the beginning of their scope for clarity. Use block scope with let and const. Confine variables to the nearest curly braces to prevent modification. Avoid namespace pollution. Prefix variables to prevent conflict with other scripts or libraries. Use strict mode. Enforce stricter rules to catch common coding mistakes. Use IIFES. Create private scope to encapsulate functionality. And use modules. Organize code into modules to manage dependencies and prevent scope pollution. With this, we can conclude our lesson for scope.